Swakwek. Wariguano hela dunika Jotanunia Giganto de Yungwat Lao in Islat Day. Jerry Hill ni Yungyats Osmini Geha. Kahun Hadadi ni Yungyats Ungwe Hongwe Neha. Well, I'll skip over the rest of it and get on with my presentation. Last year I did a presentation and I ended it with Bart Simpson, a little clip in which he had been sent to France as an exchange student, and he was placed with this bogus winemaker, which is against the law in France. And he was abused by this person. And so he ran away, and he was looking for a policeman. And he found a policeman. And he was talking to the policeman. He says, this guy is abusing me. He's making fake wine, et cetera, but he said it all in English. And the gendarme took him as a person who was a little bit crazy and took him back to the guy who was abusing him. And after the policeman left, then the abuse got even worse. And so sometime later, he was doing things like, I think, putting some kind of antifreeze in his wine to make it appear aged. And anyhow, Bart Simpson runs away again. And this time, he sees this policeman and he looked at him and he says, oh, what's the use? He says, he'll never understand me. He says, I just don't know what's going on. And the policeman saw him and he came over and he says, what's the matter? And he started talking, and he discovered that he could speak French. He had acquired the language in that abusive situation. And so he explained what was going on to the policeman, and the policeman just got outraged. And he said, come on, we're gonna go see this guy. So they went over and they busted his operation, and Bart became a hero, and this guy got taken away in shackles. And it's taken me longer to talk about it than the actual clip, but what I wanted to try and get across was something about the magic of language in general. And we've heard some really wonderful people here yesterday and the day before, and they were presenting perspectives about language, and I think that each of them was kind of reflecting the work that they do and the focus that they have. So some of it was, as Professor Krashen, who is one of my heroes, was able to talk about it from a very theoretical level, but also from a practical level as a multilingual speaker himself. And I think that we've had that kind of experience where we have multilingual speakers. Sometimes we limit it to bilingual, but there's people that speak many different languages. And some of those people are on our staff, and some of those people are you on the outside of that as participants in this. And some of you are wanting to be bilingual speakers. And so we all have this interest in language. And of course, when we talk about it, sometimes we talk about how we present our lesson plans, or I think they call it curriculum development. The teachers sit down and you could see how much preparation they do. Like the woman yesterday talking about what she did, she broke it down in a way that made it really understandable as far as those statistics that she presented in support of what they were doing. And they were kind of getting to that point of, and I think it's a point we all kind of address, is sometimes wondering, like, where did this all start? You know, I'm a judge and I'm also a lawyer, and one of the things that I've said in different presentations I've made is that the economic success that we've had in Indian country is really attributed to gaming enterprises, but not all tribes have gaming enterprises. So some places it's booming, like here, and like the other places around Albuquerque and at home, and any place where there's a population center, and a lot of the ambitions and arguments that people have are about trying to locate in a population center that can support gaming. And I think that we have to kind of bear in mind that there's a basis for that. I mean, I think that if they thought, they being the dominant society and federal government and whatnot, that we couldn't have it, well, we wouldn't have it. And somewhere along the line, 25 years ago or so, there was a big push for gambling. It started off with bingo, but then as I researched, it really started off with cigarettes. Well, and when I researched more, it started with other things, and that's the way everything is. It doesn't start just there. There's something that preceded it. And so as we talk about our language, we were also looking at that. You know, what's most important? And I happened to be at a conference in which a lady from Oklahoma was speaking. She's a linguist and a teacher. She's gone now. Very, very wonderful, intelligent person. But she was saying that in her presentation that there was 4 kinds of language. And one of them was when we make a speech or a presentation like I'm doing now, that's one kind. There's the religious kind in which there's a, prescribed recitation of speeches and other things that go on that address a particular topic. There's, argumentation. Like as an attorney, we do that, but we argue all the time. My kids argue, my grandkids argue, they argue with each other, they argue with me. But argument in the sense of debate or discussion is not a bad thing. So when we hear up here these different perspectives, it's something that other people see that allows us to connect the dots between what they're saying and the kind of work that we're doing. And the reason we come here, other than to gamble and support the local economy, and hoping that we might take some of the local economy's benefits, we really come here to hear other people, and we come to meet other people. And so we've got that really wide range of interests that are here. We have educators, educated linguists, we have historians, we have many, many teachers. And some people have spent a career in teaching, and I'm interested in listening to them because I've retired 3 times, and I've learned that retirement doesn't really mean anything except that you quit getting paid. But you're still up, and people expect you to do things, and people keep hitting on you to do stuff. And unless you're the fishing or whittling type, or saved your money and bought one of those big old buses so you could tour the country, you wind up kind of doing what you were doing before. You just do it in a slightly different way. So I had the opportunity when I was working to be an apprentice to an old man who's passed on, Amos Christian, and my relatives over here know him well. He was a fixture in our community, and he got a degree in linguistics at the age of 60, and he loved to do linguistics. And I had a degree in linguistics when I came home, and I had promised myself that I'm going to do this, and I never did it. And it was 87 that I always knew Amos, but I went in and I started asking him about some things, and that led to a conversation, and the conversation turned into daily lunch meetings. And he and I did that for 10 years. And people would come and go, well, of course he was the expert. And I says, but we met on linguistics. The difference is that he was a first language speaker and I was becoming a second language speaker. But he liked to do linguistics, and one of my brothers told me, he says, well, just do what he does, do what he wants. And I thought, that's right. This is kind of like the old way. You don't come in and tell the teacher what you want. You do what the teacher says, and you let him be the leader or her be the leader. And I think that that's the way we also grow up as infants and children and young adults and finally become to be old people. We're kind of moving down the line as we age. And so those things kind of made me think, and when the people I would talk with that are teachers, we'd talk about their experience and the things that had happened to them language-wise that had motivated them. It's kind of like I was turned on, and I tried to encourage other people to get turned on, and I found out that's not possible. People have to find their own interest in their own way, and but one of the things that people are drawn to is energy. And when they see somebody doing something that looks like it's fun or looks like it's interesting, their ears perk up and they start paying attention. It's like when you hear like somebody laughing really hard, and I'm thinking, I want to know what they're laughing about so I can laugh too. Laughing feels good. Well, it also happens with other pursuits where what they're doing looks interesting or sounds interesting and you want to know more about it, so you gravitate towards that. Artists do it all the time, and whether you're a performing artist or a craft artist or any kind of art, really, you take an interest in it that is more than just a curiosity, but something that kind of impels you to go and learn about those things and find out about it. And as you get older, you accrue this, and it results in, like this kind of a meeting where people are talking about what they do and hearing what other people do, and then looking for the big theories that kind of govern it all, and also looking for the practices that they can take home and use. And so hopefully that's kind of what we're doing here these couple of days. When we were talking about this, we were looking for a theme, and the theme was that, like what I had heard, and what I had recited about the types of language that gets used, and it all comes from conversation, is that we ought to focus on conversation, and that there was a place in which we needed to address written language. And from my perspective, I could see that even though many people have been able to retain their heritage language, many places have not. And in some places, they have never heard their language. And so where it's alive and being used and healthy, that's something to appreciate, that our first language speakers are really people that we need the most, and they're very much treasures. First language speakers are not necessarily teachers. People have to learn how to teach in this kind of a sense to be able to say, this is a practice, or this is a curriculum, or this is the goal, or something like that. I used to hate certain words. Chris, could you help me? This thing ain't moving. I would hate certain words like curriculum. It just sounded so formal and
Yes, just hit this button.
okay.
That'll take you forwards, that'll take you backwards.
Okay, thank you. That was, one of the things that I was most interested in putting something to. Even when we were discussing it, we were saying, well, you aren't born talking. You have to acquire that skill. And, it's like walking. You don't have to be told, like many of our presenters were saying. You're in an atmosphere in which that's the way you have to navigate if you want things. And so the words that come first and the words that come second, and pretty soon they get very complicated. And by the time a child is 1 or 2 or some very early time like that, they are fluent. They know what they like, they know what they don't like. And some of those things we don't really address. We kind of skip right by them as if they're not important. But in some of the things that we've done, we recognize that no or negation is a tremendous tool. When somebody says no, it's a little bitty word, but in different languages, it's short and it's direct and you know what it means. You don't have to have it explained. You could see it. Well, a lot of linguists, theorize about when language starts. And at one of our sessions, we did this presentation, and some of you may have seen it, in which this lady is advancing the theory that you learn in the womb, and you're already listening, before you're even born. And, I think that there's some things to support that. In general, I think we kind of start after the baby's born, but, that's another theory as to when did everything start. Some people would say when they start making noise and hearing noise, or when they smell their caretaker, that kind of bonds. And, there's so much truth in those kinds of observations, because nobody really knows for sure. I mean, it's all theory, because while we're talking about how it happened, it happens. The kid stands up and starts walking. They don't have to be explained how to walk. A physical scientist could probably tell you that, it's a series of being off balance on purpose in a direction that you want to go in, which doesn't mean anything to a kid, especially a young kid, especially a toddler. Young children kind of don't listen, they absorb. And so an explanation to a kid, whether you're telling them how much you love them or telling them not to do something, or something along those lines, isn't listened to. I think that more of the intent comes from the emotion of the speaker. A baby can tell when the caretaker's upset. They can also tell when the caretaker is happy, and vice versa. So some people would say that language starts at the first look, when baby and mama talk. And I said, well, that's kind of part of it, but what about babies that are born blind? Or what about moms that are born blind? I says, they connect. So there's more reason than just the look. And some people are born with other difficulties that they overcome. So our communication system and language has many, many different, facets. I think what we have done here is try to focus on, let us not worry about the writing systems. The writing systems are there. In some places they're not there. Some people have strong feelings about our language is oral and should never be written. Well, that's fine, and that's a decision that community or those people have made. But in other places, it was already there when you got here. When we went to the Hawaiians, they had newspapers back in 1820 or something like that, all in Hawaiian. And, you know, it's pretty amazing when you look at, in New Zealand, they had writing systems, you know, up to their treaty. They had one treaty in 1841, and that treaty was the only treaty that governed all the islands. They have one language with many different dialects and things like that, but they communicate with one another. They had a treaty written in English, but it was also written in Maori. And when they finally were able to get to the Privy Council in England, they brought that one treaty, and they were talking about the English was that long and the Maori was that long. And the reason for that was that the Maoris went into detail when they talked about providing education, providing health care, providing different benefits that they were ceding in land to have that kind of recognition and support. And of course it got brushed off to the side, and the Maori people became the lowest economic class. Their prisons were filled with people. They had many, many kinds of abuses, but there was also people that were maintaining it. The other thing was that New Zealand is a small, isolated country, and the percentage of Maoris is much higher than we Indians in the United States. I mean, we're outnumbered, you know, hugely, as our president would say. It doesn't stop anything, but it gives you a kind of a perspective as to what the law is, what's allowable, and the things that people do about it. And those people are very strong in their belief, but they also have a lot of problems. So they're like us. We're strong in our belief in as much as we could hear people express their feelings about, like Laylee did on Monday. I had known her for many years when she was a very young girl. I was surprised. She just looks young, you know, one of those people that gets old but stays looking young. And she's not old. I mean, I only say her age relatively because I remember her with her daughter holding her in her arms when she's an infant. And now the girl was in the back of the room with her little friend, and she's almost eyeball to eyeball with her mom. And I says, yeah, they kind of do that. You know, your kids get big, you know, and pretty soon you're eyeball to eyeball, and then you're looking up at them because they're moving on. Life is moving on. All these things around us are moving on, including our language. So rather than argue about whether the language starts in the womb or starts with the eyeball to eyeball or the first murmuring sounds or anything else, we kind of go back to more like where we are right now. And where we are right now is addressing endangered languages. And you note at the banquet the other night, we were talking about, we've been doing this for 25 years, and we've also been growing in our knowledge, and we've also been adaptive to new theory and new practices, and bringing in people that know more about this than we do. And that's the essence of learning. Even when Professor Krashen was talking about learning, I was hearing him say that we learn all of our lives, and that we need to do that and acknowledge it and not feel like, you know, well, this is it. I know everything now, so I can go. Nobody knows everything. Nobody. Some people, you know, give that facade, you know, that I got all the answers, but nobody has all the answers. And we don't either, but what we do have is we have energy, and we're dedicated to this cause of helping people that want to revitalize and to speak their languages, and to first speakers who want to pass it along so that we can work from it. And I think that one of the things that we do in this kind of work is learn from what works someplace else. I mean, I've heard, I went to New Zealand finally. I didn't want to go, but they took me kicking and screaming, and I was glad because I was cynical, and my cynicism went away the more I met the people. And every time we went to a new marae, they fed us and they brought their families out, and it was just, really something. And I had heard from other people, they said, oh, you got to go to New Zealand. And I said, I don't have to go anyplace. Oh, you got to go to Hawaii because they're doing all these great things. And to me, I wasn't hearing it the right way. What I was hearing was, you have to go and be like the Maoris. And I said, I don't want to be like a Maori. I want to be like an Oneida. And I don't want to be like a Hawaiian. I want to be like an Oneida. And, of course, they didn't say that out loud, but, I think the attitude was out there where I want to know what I can do. I don't want to know what other people have done. And I would look and see what they have done. And when they have done good things, I would be, like I said before, it compels my interest, and I want to know, what about that? When you go someplace and you don't understand what people are saying, that's a great experience. I mean, that's kind of like taking you back to the time when you're a baby, only you're in this atmosphere in which you haven't learned how to negotiate through language yet, but you're beginning to understand, and you're not messed up with a whole bunch of ideas. And so, what one of the speakers called baggage. We have a lot of baggage and a lot of trauma, generational trauma from the things that have happened. Terrible things have happened. It's hard to read and think about that and wonder, how do you explain that to, children, when they get old enough and they say, what was it like then? I mean, it's not a joke. When my son was a teenager, he asked me once, he says, what was it like when you were alive? And I thought, well, as far as I know, I'm still alive, Well, he was talking about the 50s. And I says, I remember the 50s, at least some of it. And I'm thinking, well, they like this and they like that, and, it's kind of retro to them. But for me, it was a memory. I was living it, the things that we had to do. And then, that kind of follows you all the way through whatever kind of education or experience you had. Now my grandson got a scholarship for lacrosse at a college in Georgia. And I was really proud of him, and I was telling him, I says, when I was 18, I was in the service and I was already getting drunk. And that was what I thought people did. I mean, around me, that's what people did. And there weren't jobs, and there weren't other things, and there was a kind of a discouragement of ambition. If you wanted to do something, you really had to leave. Go get a job in the mill, go get a job on the railroad, or just move away altogether and just live a different way. But, I think people wanted to live in their own homes, in their own place, and they wanted it to be vibrant, and we didn't really know what any of that meant. And so we get that from the discussions that we have. This, the slides I did for this time were really kind of me talking to myself. It's like, regardless of what you say in communication, is really kind of based on a trust that we have that our meanings are similar and that our meanings are workable even when they're a little bit different. And when we begin to make these sounds that are agreeable with each other, they turn into words. And at some point, when we're talking about talk first and write later, that was even too broad to approach. And so what came to me was that what we're really talking about is comprehension. And so we can recite a lot of things, we can memorize and repeat, and that's a good thing to do, but comprehending what somebody else is saying comes before that feeling of being able to express yourself. So I think that what we've heard here in different presentations is the importance of comprehension. That means listening. And it doesn't mean just hearing a noise, it means listening, really listening, like a musician listens to something, or speakers or other people that really start listening. Like you want to know, what does all that mean, or what does all that mean to me? And so building on that, there's other people in other places where we have spent a lot of time talking about accents and how accents grow into dialect and how dialect grows into pidgin and how pidgin grows into something else until, we have related languages and people can explain a whole bunch of things, and it's very interesting if you like that kind of stuff, but if you don't care, don't mean shit. It's like, well, he just, raving on again, and I think, well, sometimes people say that of me, and they said, well, Jerry finally went over the edge. There he is, he's talking, nobody's even listening anymore. And I'm thinking, well, that's okay. That's okay. I make plenty of sense to myself. And, when I'm thinking, I was joking with Chris about writing a manifesto about everything that's wrong and how we can fix it. And I'm only up to my 1,000th page, and it's one sentence, no punctuation. And it means everything to me, but it don't mean anything to anybody else. The thing that we have in building that mutuality is our emotional ties and our connections with people, even people we don't like. I mean, they're there, and sometimes we're related to them. And somehow we have to transcend those things, and we do. When people get married, when people pass away, we kind of set aside whatever begrudging animosity that we may feel towards somebody, and we extend ourselves to be understanding and not let my emotional negativity spill over into something where it isn't, doesn't belong. So we have this mutual comprehensive vocabulary, and to me it's kind of based on trust. Infants are totally dependent on their caretaker, usually the mom, but they're also dependent on the community in which they live, which is a family and a home. And before they can ever talk about love, they're loving. And before a parent can have that kind of emotional discussion with a child, they're pretty well grown up. And, if you pass the time when you could have spoken to them, at some point you go back and you make that connection. And to me, that's a trust. And that trust is something that even when I don't understand what you say or what you do, I think you're doing it right. And I think you're doing it in a positive way, and I think you're doing it from caring. And of course, we have all the other stuff that goes on too. People mention tribal politics, which is an interesting phenomena because people get very angry and say harsh things about one another and that. And during one of my sessions with my teacher, we talked about what I would call bad words, not swear words, but bad words, to say, why is something bad? What makes it bad? My grandma said, a bad dog is one that doesn't bark, it just walks up and bites you. I said, well, that's pretty bad. That means you have to be alert for yourself. That's kind of what I took her to mean. But there's other words like lying. We have liars. We have backstabbers, we have troublemakers, we have people that do ambush, we have people that plot against the community, they plot against each other, and that's really human nature. And so human nature is really reflected in our language, even that part of it. If it wasn't, we wouldn't have words for it. We just say all the good words and say we live like the good way. And I said, well, we try to live like the good way, but there's the other side that makes us have to address those things that we'd prefer not to address if we don't have to. But I think that, like what we're looking at is, I had mentioned that when I was 18, I was getting drunk. Well, I got drunk when I was 15. And, and I got progressively drunk as I went along. And by the time I went in the service, I don't know if I'd call myself a drunkard, but I thought weekends were for getting drunk. That's what I thought. And people that didn't do that, I wondered what was wrong with them. They don't like to have fun. Well, I had been brainwashed to the point where I thought that's what fun was. And of course it's not, but it's something that was not inflicted on us as much as we gravitated to, because alcohol offers some kind of numbness from the reality that you're kind of in a second-class place in this society. Why did we have to live here and, find it hard to get jobs and have to go, 100 miles away to get to a doctor and things like that. Those were the kind of things that would come to me, but, as I'm telling my grandson, I says, it's different now. It's different where we live, but some places it's like the old way too. I said, so we can't forget that. And then one of the things that we were addressing here with endangered languages is that our first language speakers, that population is diminishing. That's why they're such a treasure. That's why in places where there are no first language speakers, the people that want it don't even get to hear what it sounds like. And so if we have that benefit to have been around and are around our speaking communities, that's beautiful. It's not just beautiful, it's necessary to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. So as I'm making out this PowerPoint, which I wrote it down, and then my clerk is the one that knows how to do it. And so when I come down here, she sends me with a thumb drive, and then I ask Chris to set it up for me. So, I'm of that age where just tell me which button to push, and I'll try to take it from there. So that's kind of what I do. One of the things, I was talking to myself and I said, well, why? And I'm asking myself why. What is my challenge? What would be ideal? Well, it would be ideal to land in a community where the language is strong and vibrant, and there would be no explanation as to why I can speak. It's because I grow up in it and I absorb it, and it's part of me. That's what we talk about as our first language speakers. And I was encouraged by what Professor Krashen said, something like that in more articulate fashion, but that's the idea that I got, is that you don't have to teach grammar or word lists or any of those other practices completely. You have to create the environment in which people can hear what it's supposed to sound like. And so I've had that opportunity to hear my grandma talk and to hear other people talk and even go to church. I don't go to church anymore, but that was a place where you could hear people talk. They talked Indian all the time, and I said, well, what are they talking about? Or somebody asked me, and I says, they're just talking like people, like, how are you? I haven't seen you for a long time. Is so-and-so still okay? Or what's happening with so-and-so? I haven't seen you for a long time. That's conversation. That's just caring about one another. That's the greetings that we have when we're sharing, to say, like, I'm a regular person and you're a regular person, and the things that happen to you that may seem mundane, not earth-shaking events, but personally they become very important because you like to know. I think that's the positive side of what they call rumors. Rumors are like negative things people say about one another, but there's also positive things that people say about one another. I had a young attorney, and she says, you Oneidas are some messed up people. And I said, why do you say that? And she says, you're always arguing and fighting and signing petitions and doing this and that. And I says, well, that's only the part that you see. Just then some man walked by that I know, and I said, you see that guy? I says, he'll never sign a petition. He'll never make a speech. He'll never argue with anybody. I says, he just works and takes care of his family. He's a trusted person. If you ask him for help, he'll help you. You know, he's not the kind of person you get angry with and, you know, what the hell's wrong with you and, you know, things like that. But it's more, I says, those are the real Oneida people. I says, the only ones you see are just a couple of hundred that go to the meeting and like to holler at each other. I says, but there's a whole bunch more of people that live and take care of their families and become positive in their community and don't ask for anything. They just work and earn it. And so it's a matter of observation, like wherever you are, you see a certain thing, but that certain thing ain't necessarily the way it is all over the place. One of the things I looked at was that natural environment, and we do classes and sessions, and you know, depending on the frequency and selection of learners like they do in the Army, where they have, enforced immersion boot camp. They don't mess around. They select people that want to do it, that are capable of doing it, and they just pour it on them. We don't do that necessarily. What we do is put a sign up and say, language class on Tuesdays and Thursdays in the library, you know, from 7 to 9. And, you go and do that. Sometimes they put lessons up in different departments and things where we have it, and that's really a good thing, and it's improvement over what was there before, but it's not the same as a demanding environment in which we have people that are there and expected to be able to do something, not in the sense of making you talk, but in the sense of you paying attention when other people are talking and trying to share things with you. So I think that, of course, the ideal is just growing up in it. So those of you who grew up in your first language, your heritage language, have been blessed with a wonderful opportunity, and then trying to pass it on through schools and classes and other ways. That's a good thing to happen. It's trying to avoid what linguists would say in 20 years, 30 of your languages will be gone, and within another 20 years after that, there'll be 4 or 5 places where the languages are still used. And who wants to own up to that? I mean, who wants to say that, in 20 years, everything you're doing won't matter? Well, then why even do it now if it ain't gonna matter? Well, it's personal, like you do it because you love it. I mean, I give people my cards. I says, I have 2 cards. I have my business card, which says I'm a lawyer. That's how I make money. And then I have this other card for ILI, which says we work, to help people with their languages, and I don't get paid for it. So one is my work card, and the other one is my love card. I love doing this, and I love seeing all. Before I hurt myself or somebody else, I love seeing all you people here. It's a wonderful experience for me, and I like the way my clerk put this in and did these little transitions like the old movies, where they do these different things and transition. She says, what do you think about that? And I said, that's great. I couldn't have thought of it, but I was glad she did. I think that what we're looking at in the ideal is first language speakers, if we have them. If we have them, we need to respect them and learn from them as much as we can. I think there are places with no speakers, and that's not the end of it. That's recognition of the reality that that's the way it is in that place, and we're all kind of sliding towards that. I think some of the things that makes it positive for us is that whatever we got, we work from that. So if we do have first language speakers, we pay attention to them. We don't try to go there and kind of nitpick and ask for how do you say this and how do you say that. That's not acquiring the language. Acquiring the language is what people have said about comprehensive listening, actually listening. You know, you can talk to people and you know they're listening. Sometimes you can talk to people and when they are listening, that makes you serious. It makes you want to be honest. It makes you want to not say foolish things. It makes you stay in the moment, and that's one of the features, I think, that occurs in our language teaching, and in our best moments to be able to hear somebody talk and comprehend without having to say anything back. So when our young Mohawk man was here yesterday, and he's probably still around today someplace, I haven't seen him yet this morning, but I could understand him. People would say Oneida and Mohawk are a lot alike. Well, they are a lot alike. They're not alike, but they're a lot alike. And our speakers can speak with their speakers, and they aren't arguing about dialect or accent or anything like that because they understand each other. And if we come to a word that we don't understand, we can stop and even discuss the meaning of something to go on and, you know, clarify our understanding about what's being said, because we want to be there and we want to understand it. So we are in immersion. A young Choctaw man told me, he said the problem with it is that it's English immersion. Wherever you look, wherever you listen, TV, newspaper, books, all that, all in English. And what one of the Shirley Murphy was saying the other day was that she stands up and really, you know, gives it. She says, we need Indian linguists, and we have them. Some of them were not educated in school, some of them were, but the younger ones are now being educated in school, and they're being able to understand applied linguistics. It doesn't mean like that's going to save us. It means like that's another tool that we have to use. And we also have the energy of young people to carry it forward. So we're doing what I call, you know, it's a traditional thing. We want to survive. That's an expression of survival. And so the work that we do is an expression of survival. And as a judge and as a lawyer, I've said to people many times, I said, the reason we have the success we do and the presence that we do now is because people have worked very hard to maintain what they call the old way, and there's nothing more definitive about the old way than our heritage language. That's the only thing the government can't say that, well, we gave you the reservation, well, we gave you the program, well, you gave us this, you didn't give us our language. Our languages were here before. Our languages in our communities have a survival aspect of their own. They want to be talked. They want to be used. They want to be part of the community. And even when we're fighting, you know, we're trying to communicate with one another. I was thinking this morning that my mother's cousin, he's an old guy. Well, he's gone now, so he got old and passed away. But I remember him growing up. He was kind of a joker, kind of a quiet guy. He was an iron worker. And he says, Jerry, he says, I want to show you a picture. You know, and it was a picture of one of the Mackinac Bridge towers. You know, it's like, I don't know how many 100 feet high, and there's guys on top of it. And he's one of them. And he says, that's me. I says, but you're facing away. How do I know that's you? And he says, it's me. And I says, we're going to have to prove this. Would you please turn around so I can see if there's a resemblance of you from behind? And he just laughed. But he was a joker. He wanted to engage with me on something that was important to him. And at other times, he'd see me and he'd say, hey, Jerry, come over here and tell me some lies. And, that was kind of a common expression, a way of teasing somebody to say, I don't believe a word you're saying, but it's interesting, so come on over and tell me some lies. And I thought at first, I says, well, wait a minute, I don't lie. And then he says, yes, you do. He says, all of us lie. We all lie. So let's not pretend that we don't. He says, just make sure that the lies are interesting and don't necessarily hurt anybody. So, maybe it's not a lie, maybe it's a joke. And so I took it that way. But it was something that made me understand the engagement like we do with our children and our families. We engage with them. I have twin granddaughters. They're 6 years old. They are identical twins, and they love to play. And I love to talk to them. It's like when I was in college, we used to smoke dope. And I'm not proud of it, but it's something that we did. And, okay, so what? I don't do it anymore. But I said, I kind of get the same feeling in talking with my granddaughters. I like to hear what they think, why they think it. They're 6 years old, they started school. I talk to them as much as possible in the language, and in school, they're getting something else in Head Start and kindergarten. They're learning how to talk, and they're learning how to do word lists, and they're learning how to do all these things that we've criticized. And but they're doing it with their friends, and they're proud of what they're doing. And so they want to count for me. And so I'm thinking, God, I don't like this. I don't want to just be, promoting word lists. And then I thought, I don't have to promote word lists. I can teach them how to say brown dog instead of just saying brown and dog and not knowing how to connect them. Like Ryan was saying yesterday, our words are not even words, they're sentences, they're phrases. If you look for a word, like you could say snowflake, but it kind of don't mean nothing unless it has a context. And in our language, the whole context is supplied. Somebody did something, it comes in a certain direction, you're speaking to somebody, or they're speaking to you, or they're speaking to them, or, there's a number of ways to be able to do that. And people that have acquired the language, when you say, we have 75 pronouns in our language. And I said, well, somebody went through the trouble of counting all that. Good speakers don't have to rely on, do I know 57, or do I know 60, or do I know 14? They just talk. Some of them can't read, but they can talk. And that facility of being able to express themselves is something that you can hear. This kid I know told me a long time ago, he was telling me about traditional speakers. And I hear people talk about the wonderful oratory. And I said, well, how would you know unless you could understand them in the language? Well, that's something somebody would say, it's wonderful the way they stand up and command attention, and you can hear it in their voice. And he said, well, that's true. He said, when somebody has something to say, and they're saying it sincerely, and they're saying it from their heart, and they're also saying it for their intellectual, not to show off their ability, but for the things that they do, you don't have to tell people to be quiet. I mean, when Laylee was beginning her presentation the other day, we were chattering away, and then she came on, and the room got quieter and quieter until it was just her talking. And that was a fantastic, to me, that was an oratory. It was in English, but she was saying that, and the young fellow that was talking to me before about that said, you don't have to tell anybody that this is important. You can hear it in their voice, even if you don't understand the words. People pay attention. You don't have to tell kids to quit running around and quit making noise because somebody's going to say something important. You can hear it. It's there. And I think that those are the kind of things that I personally like to relate to, not to be like that as much as to be able to hear with my ears and to comprehend what's going on, not just specifically, but also in a general way that makes me feel like I'm part of this. And I had I'll end this up right now by saying, about 20 years ago, I had a case in the Supreme Court, and I was representing a woman who had married into our tribe. And she had moved there. It's about 50 miles away. And she moved, and she lived here in Oneida. And they had 4 kids, and they lived in tribal housing, and she worked for the tribe. And of course, the husband was there, and he worked for the tribe too. And the issue was over taxation, income taxation. And the state's point was that you as an Indian quit being an Indian when you leave your reservation. You know, it's like when you step across the street, you're not an Indian anymore, and therefore you're not entitled to the benefits of income taxation because you're not in your own reservation. And we took the opposite point, of course, to say like an Indian is an Indian wherever they go. And they aren't claiming to be part of the place that they live in if that's not their home community. They don't want to be somebody else, at least in a tribal sense. You know, it's like you can go live someplace else, but you're there and you're part of the community, but your blood connection is back where you came from. And you see that all the time, and it was something that they didn't agree with us. Anyhow, they voted and they said, no, we're right and you're wrong. And one of those attorneys came up to me, he was watching. It was really a great experience, you know, kind of just doing that. I had worked on that for 5 years, and I felt strong. I felt that we were right, and no matter what they said, this was a positive statement about who we are. And this lawyer says, he says, well, you lost. He says, how do you feel about that? And I says, we didn't lose. I says, they got it wrong. And I says, that's one of the things we have to know about the law, is that it ain't always right. They can say it and they can jump up and down, they can ram it down your throat and try to take your land and everything that you got, but it ain't right, and that doesn't make it right. It only makes them more powerful for right now. And anyhow, at the same time, we were having a great law recital in our longhouse, and this man came down and they recite the law for 4 days. And I was glad to be able to understand him a lot. And I was still in the zone from my preparation for the argument in the Supreme Court. And even though they got it wrong, I felt good. I felt I did my part and I said it right, and it's still up there for discussion if anybody wants to discuss it. When I came back to the longhouse, in the court, I was really proud of myself for what I had done. But when I came to the longhouse, now I'm just another Bear Clan, you know, sitting there listening to this man go on, and I thought, how can he do that? You know, he just goes on and on and on and on. And to me, that was kind of a connection of preparation when you're doing something really difficult, and you know, you keep on doing it. Anyhow, you get yourself in a zone where everything that you're thinking is revolving around your thought and your purpose and your goal. So I'm out of time. So Dani Tonio le wagali wat kweniji na tiangali wayandakwa nene skaliwat skana wade wat nutuni to negawana. Thank you.